Hello and welcome to the Vaults of Terra. My name is Ed and today we're going to be continuing our Imperial Guard videos by having a look at the ranks within the Imperial Guard. Now the reason we're doing this is because there was a little bit of confusion in my last video as to the status of some of the Imperial Guardsmen who we see in the Imperial Guard fiction and to the level of their seniority. And because globally we don't all have the same ranks and roles within our military organisations, so for some these ranks would be a little bit confusing. So I thought I'd just go through them now, starting from the most senior level to the most basic level. So the hierarchy of the Imperial Guard is actually quite complex due to its size, however it is understandable. Now the names of the ranks and the uniforms can vary throughout the Imperium, but the Imperial Guard does adhere to this rank structure so that if a unit needs to be commanded by a different officer, they'll be able to understand the seniority of that officer. Now the Imperial Guard are ultimately controlled by the Departamento Munitorum, who are themselves controlled by the High Lords of Terra. Now the relevant High Lords of Terra in relation to the Imperial Guard are the Chancellor of the Estate Imperium, the Master of the Administratum, and most importantly, the Lord Commander Militant of the Imperial Guard. Now, subordinate to the Lord Commander Militant are 5 Lord Commanders of each of the 5 segmentae in the Imperium. Now, those 5 Lord Commanders are Lord Commander Solar, Lord Commander Pacificus, Lord Commander Tempestus, Lord Commander Obscurus, and Lord Commander Ultima. Now, there are also War Masters in this rank structure, and War Masters are only appointed when a crusade is to take place, and that means that a Lord Commander will usually take the title of War Master and persecute that crusade in its entirety, leaving his role to another officer whilst he persecutes this crusade. Now the highest conventional rank within the Imperial Guard is that of the Lord General Militant, and I'll just quickly recap that in a moment. Now one thing I wanted to mention here is the Commissariat. Now you may or may not know that there are political officers that operate within the Imperial Guard called Commissars, who are members of the Commissariat. Now these Commissars are not technically answerable to any officer but their own internal superiors. However, they will follow the orders of a more experienced regimental commander in order to maintain a cohesive military structure. However, their role in the rank structure is to enforce discipline and execute anyone they believe who is lacking the moral fibre to command an Imperial Guard unit. Usually this means if there's any sign of cowardice or retreat in the face of the enemy, the Commissar is legally allowed to execute the officer immediately, take command of the unit or regiment or whoever was being commanded, and lead the fight back against the enemy. Now this may seem a little bit disruptive for the chain of command, however it has operated efficiently in many units over the years, including some units that are solely led by an officer commissar, such as a colonel commissar or a major commissar, who are able to control the unit and continue their duties as a commissar. Now going back to the usual ranks within the Imperial Guard, we'll start with the High Commanders. Now the highest commander is someone I've mentioned before, the Lord Commander Militant, who is a High Lord of Terra and is nominally in charge of all the Imperial forces within the Imperium. However, technically you wouldn't really be able to control them all, as it's virtually impossible to micromanage any Imperial Guard regiment or even a group of regiments over such a vast distance, dealing with millions of regiments and billions of soldiers. Thus he delegates his command to the Lord Commanders of each segmentum, which I've mentioned before, who will nominally control the units within their segmentum and distribute them as needed in order to persecute the wars that are going on there. Now again, even though they are more focused in their duties, they still have a vast amount of information to deal with, and so there are ranks beneath them in order to coordinate on a more ground level as opposed to the overall level that they command on. Now, as I've mentioned previously, a War Master is the equivalent of a Lord Commander and has the power to command an entire crusade force, which can be made up of millions of soldiers, who will take part in conquering or destroying areas of the galaxy which have previously been lost to the Imperium or have yet to be conquered, thus taking more territory, although sometimes they can take decades or they could even take centuries or millennia, depending on the skill of the War Master, whose rank could be passed on if the crusade takes too long and the War Master eventually dies of old age during the conflict. Now beneath these Lord Commanders and War Masters are the Lord General Militant. Now these are probably the more focused of the Lord Generals, as they are there to directly impact a battle group or an entire sector within a segmentum. Now there are dozens of sectors in a segmentum, so these Lord General Militants are far more focused on the conflicts that are occurring within the Imperium, and so are more able to report up the chain of command and take command further down than a Lord Commander who would be hard pressed to keep control of all these different operations. Now these are the high command ranks who command overall Imperial Guard forces. What I'm going to go on to now are General Staff, who are in command of multiple regiments, or just a single regiment, but are more focused on an individual conflict as opposed to sector or segmentum-wide conflicts. Now the highest rank at a general level is Lord General. Now this is known by many different names, such as Lord Marshal, Captain General, and also Lord Castellan, and these ranks are specifically for generals who are able to control a specific battlefront, who deal with specifics in a battle, who will usually dictate strategy as to the overall conflict that they are taking part in. Now this role is also taken by a War Master in a crusade, who is far more intimately controlling of their crusade than, say, a Lord Commander would be. Now you can see where the cross-pollination of roles is occurring in the Imperial Guard. However, as a crusade is actually quite rare, it means that the Lord General is generally the one who commands a battle line. Now beneath Lord Generals are of course Generals. Now they are very high rank, and what they do is they control specific battlegrounds. So there's usually a single general controlling an entire conflict on a battlefront, whereas a Lord General will usually be controlling several different battlefronts and may even be in control of Imperial Guard forces over an entire world. Now the General will be more intimate with his regiments, will know the commanders of these regiments, and will also be more involved in dealing with the day-to-day of the conflict. Now one thing they will have is a lot of General Staff. Now these General Staff will actually usually be more junior officers who come in to be technical assistants and will usually help the General in planning strategy, and also will help command by issuing orders on his behalf. Now beneath a general we get into the regimental command structure. Now these will be commanders who, although have authority in the entire Imperial Guard, will usually only be able to command an entire regiment of Imperial Guard, which is still a vast force. Now the highest rank in this regiment is a colonel, and a colonel is almost always a regimental CO or commanding officer, and will have their own sort of general staff, usually made up of tech priests, sanctioned psychers, and commissars, who are there to advise him on his regimental command and to help him persecute the battle that his regiment is taking part in. So there will usually be a command squad, as you see in the board game, who will be the ones commanding the conflict for that regiment. Now, beneath the colonel is usually a major. Now, a major can command a regiment, although that's very rare, and usually they are the second in command for a regiment, who will assist the colonel and also take part in the more administration of the regiment, making sure that everything is done properly, making sure discipline is maintained, and making sure that the regiment is operational in time for a conflict. Now, beneath the major is a captain, who will usually be in charge of a number of units, and the captain is a very numerous rank, as it is required to micromanage the regiment itself, who will usually deal with non-commissioned officers on a more day-to-day basis, and is able to command directly on the battlefield. Finally, there are lieutenants or lieutenants, depending on where you live in the world, and they are the most junior commissioned officer in the Imperial Guard, and what they do is they deal with the administration. They are very rarely the sole command in a regiment unless the entire command structure has been wiped out, and their position is to essentially learn how to command. They'll still be commanding a unit and making sure that the unit takes part in the operation they're a part of. However, they will usually report directly to a captain and will usually assist him or her in the control of the unit. Well, now once we leave the lieutenant rank, we're going into the non-commissioned officers. Now there aren't many non-commissioned officer ranks in the Imperial Guard, unlike the Imperial Navy, who have several, but the non-commissioned officers usually come from just general guardsmen who have been promoted over their term of service for their skill in battle and their ability to command, and although very few will ever reach anything like a lieutenant level, will usually be quite senior in a regiment and very well respected for their fighting prowess. Now the most senior of the NCOs in the Imperial Guard is a sergeant. Now a sergeant is a squad commander and may even command several squads depending on the regiment's layout. Usually they're a little bit older than most other non-commissioned officers and will be able to react quickly. They'll be on the front line with their unit fighting the enemy, and they will help disseminate orders for their officers and report up the chain of command to their officers in order for the officers to know what's going on and understand how a squad is performing. And beneath a sergeant is a corporal. Now this is a junior NCO rank, and a corporal will be there to assist the sergeant in making sure that discipline is carried out, will usually be there to give the most day-to-day of orders, help inspect the troops, and be usually just the step up between the sergeant and the guardsman to help administer the unit and help give orders in battle. Finally, there is the Guardsman or Trooper. Now, the Guardsman is the lowest in the chain of command, usually. There may be others beneath him, such as conscripts or suicide squads of Imperial criminals. However, Guardsmen are usually the lowest of the low. They'll be some of the most inexperienced, along with the lieutenants, who are the most inexperienced officers, and they will usually be quite green, they'll have the most basic of training, and they make up the bulk of the Imperial Guard. They will never be in a command position, however they may be promoted to corporal or sergeant depending on the amount of time they spend in the conflict, and if they distinguish themselves enough they may even be promoted to a officer grade, although this is again very, very rare, and usually officers will usually be taken from the nobility or ruling class of a homeworld, with the majority of the troopers being made up of the lower classes. So this comes to the end of the ranks within the Imperial Guard. Now, as you can see, they're quite organised. Now, the names can change depending on the regiment, although they will largely follow this structure. And as I've mentioned, there are other roles within the Imperial Guard, such as the Sanctioned Psyker or the Tech Priest. I did say Tech Marine last week, and I do apologise. And these, although not direct officers, will usually have control of some form of administration or some form of equipment that will be vital to an Imperial Guardsman taking part in a conflict. So that's everything I wanted to mention today in relation to roles and ranks. Do keep commenting below and voting for the next Imperial Guard regiment and the next Space Marine chapter you want to see. And we are leading up to Christmas at this point, so what will be happening is we are planning to put together a live Q&A session, which will be some sort of AMA, as you may have seen on Reddit, where you can ask us any sort of question you want to ask about either Warhammer 40,000 or us in person, and we will try and answer those to the best of our ability. We will take questions on a day, but if you want to send us questions now, please do send them via personal message. So that's everything I wanted to mention today. Any questions, let me know, and I'll see you next time on the Vaults of Terra.